Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the StarLadder I-League Star Series Season 3, Day 5 of the current group stage that we're in. We are, going to be casting a lot more games that are coming up. Lothar is joining me today on the casting desk. Lothar, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's super hot in Poland, so it's kind of uncomfortable, but I guess we're gonna have some really fast matches because that's the meta, right now.
Yeah, we've had last week, we talk about fast matches. We had last week Stan Sivka with a slower-ish lineup completely getting demolished by those very aggressive lines. It seems like instead of having, 2 to 3 aggro decks that are viable, we actually have a very high amount of them, 5 to 6, and people tend to favor those as they are a lot more consistent. These are the results that we had 2 days ago.
I mean, look at that.
6-0 with a very aggressive
3-0,
lineup.
3-0.
Yeah, tons of sweeps.
3-0.
Yep, that was pretty much the story of the event. It was just... aggro decks just dominating. On the flip side, I guess Zalay at the very end there did he really had unfortunate draws with his aggressive decks, ended up falling 0-3 to Stansifka's more control E lineup. But it's kind of interesting how people are polarized in the way they target decks. Quest Rogue is, as it stands, a deck that has very good matchup against control decks, but is also very prone to being targeted because of its weakness against aggro. So we see people in the best of 5 format, Conquest specifically, kind of orient a lot more of their strategies towards aggression, which I don't think is a big surprise.
Now we can see Group A and B, how they shape up. Remember, this is the round-robin format. Everyone against everyone, and after that, 2 people from the places 1 and 2 will advance directly to the offline finals, while places 3rd and 4th will play in the last chance qualifier, which will be a double elimination. So still a far away from the end, but the players are getting kind of situated where they are sitting right now.
Yeah, they're starting to get their points together, and so it's starting to shape up a little bit, but we still have about, 10 more days of casting online before everything is set up. We'll know at some point what the cutoff is for those players participating and trying to move onwards. For the day, we've got Pavel, world champion of last year, versus ShtanUdachi, Super JJ versus Kolento, 2 of my favorite players. ShtanUdachi playing a second match today. Super JJ as well will be doing that against Stan Sivka, and Sho will be playing his last match against Pavel. So these players have not all played the same amount of games in the group stage, as some of them were busy with the EU versus CN tournament that just happened recently.
Yeah. It was a big tournament, but not everyone was really happy about it. That will be about JJ after that match. But now we're going to have to focus on Pavel versus ShtanUdachi. As you know, Group B didn't play a lot of matches. Actually, Pavel and Shtan didn't play one yet. Those are the guys' first matches.
Yeah, Pavel was at EU versus CN, and the decks were submitted on the 9th of May for this group stage. So as you might imagine, we should expect something very similar to what we'd seen before. And it looks like Pavel is one of the few players that we've seen in the event not bring any form of rogue, simply choosing to bring warrior, paladin, druid, as well as mage. And this, to me, indicates that, I'm not expecting there to be Taunt Warrior, Nazat Paladin, and Jade Druid, but it could happen. Those are very control-heavy, lineups that can definitely defeat aggro. But I've seen this combination before, and it tends to be on the Discover Burn Mage, the aggro Druid, the Murloc or mid-range Paladin, as well as Pirate Warrior. Do you expect anything different?
It's really hard to say. I would say no, but at the same time, Shtan is known for being the player that experiments a lot. He was actually known in the beginning in the scene as the player who has the most played games in overall. He actually had at some point 22k games played, 11,000 on arena, 11,000 on ranked, when everyone else was kind of slacking when compared to him. I don't know how he stands right now, but it was kind of crazy. He puts insane amount of hours into Hearthstone. I think it's a feat that is very similar to Slavic countries like Kolento, Pavel, ShtanUdachi, all are just playing all the time. Excuse me, but my cat is lying on the keyboard and making weird noises.
Sure, no problem. So it's interesting because we saw the Druid on ShtanUdachi's side being banned, and I'm starting to wonder if ShtanUdachi is not targeting Pirate Warrior in a weird way. There are decks in the classes that he selected that definitely have a decent matchup against it. The only thing that stands out to me as potentially problematic is that rogue deck. So the strategy on Pavel's side could definitely be, target any hyper aggro deck with a heavy control lineup with those classes, or on the flip side, you just play hyper aggro to target just a wide array of classes, basically.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I would like to say with confidence that, hey, the meta games figure it out and it's solved, but there is still a lot of shakedown happening over, in many tournaments. It seems like we should have had a stable meta at this point in the expansion release, but it's not the case quite yet.
And that's amazing, actually, right? When a game is not figured out after some time after the initial release, that's great, because the metagame is shifting. That means more interesting matches. That means more options for the players. Personally, when it comes to Pavel's lineup, I would love to see a full aggro lineup just to, punish those rogue players that are bringing the quest rogue to the table. At the same time, the rogue is a deck that can just blow out everyone at the same time, right? You can have crazy draws. You can just make the quest on turn 4 and take the game from that point. Especially if you play taunt minions in the deck. Cheap taunt minions, Pirate Warrior kind of just stumbles over his own feet when there's a huge taunt minion and you need to sacrifice like 8 points of damage because your only sources of damage are being like 3 and 4, and you have to sacrifice 2 of them to kill a 5 HP minion. That's kind of sad when you think about it. So much damage lost, right?
Yeah, but that's the reason why it's actually interesting too, because we've seen a lot of mid-range Paladin in tournaments, right? It tends to be kind of the go-to because it covers a wide array of decks. It beats control decks of certain types. It also happens to beat aggro very frequently. But if you're Pavel and you're banning Druid and you're leaving the Rogue up, I'm assuming we're going to see a full-on aggro lineup. Like, not a halfway mid-range deck with some of the top end that you tend to see in Paladin, but just all the Murlocs, all the Flood, and then you try to smash in the Rogue as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So maybe we just see ShtanUdachi open with the Rogue, try to get a bad matchup out of the way. Since this is Conquest, and at the end of the day, these guys have to win with every single one of these decks.
Yeah, I agree about that.
Logical thing.
I agree about that. Do you think the Paladin will be sporting Divine Favors in his deck?
Oh man, like even the hyper aggro decks don't always run it. You still see them play, on the even on the aggro side, they'll still run maybe 1 Divine Favor at most. The earlier versions ran 2 of them, but I feel like we've seen...
But it's an overkill, right? Especially when you draw just 2, like you lose the match. Oh, look at that! It's actually not.
There were 2 possibilities. Either it was Jade Druid, Taunt Warrior, Control Paladin, or maybe a mid-range deck, or it was a hyper aggro lineup. It looks like Pavel is orienting himself towards the control roster and is targeting hyper aggro decks as efficiently as possible. Now, that Rogue could be a bit of a problem for him to beat later on, right? He chose to beat Druid because he probably had the information that it was J Druid and knew that it was an auto loss. But in this case, I'm starting to wonder if Pavel's lineup is favored at all, now that we've kind of flipped the table around as far as the archetypes.
Well, definitely will be an interesting match to watch. So, but we're starting now with the matchup between the Warrior and the Paladin. As you can see, Shtan is running 2 Spike Ridge Steed, which is an interesting card and like such a pain in the back for the Warrior to deal with, right? You need to sacrifice and execute to kill it, or multiple sources of damage, and you still have Shtan still has something left after that. So definitely not a really good matchup here right now.
Yeah, the Warrior player is not looking to fight off against any of the Paladins, any of the Jade Druids, even Quest Rogue is a problem. So right now, ShtanUdachi going into this blind without any info as to the hands usually has a big edge. And this is really thanks to this value generation. The Stonehill Defender generating a ton of value over time. You get extra Tyrians. You have the ability to go very wide on board, force kind of awkward brawls that leave you with residual Stegodons and Ashbringers, and those tend to be a little problematic for the Warrior player.
It also depends if even Pavel is playing Brawl, right? I mean, he can play 1 copy. He might not play even any copies because he might be just anticipating other matchups and just bringing, to Sleep with the Fishes and other means of AoEs, but that might be too weak against control matchups, right? So I'm assuming he at least plays 1. Okay, he plays Dirty Rat. That means he at least has 1 Brawl.
Right. It's one of those. I mean, building a Control Warrior without Brawl is not unheard of, especially with the Taunt list. We have seen some people sub those out for just more stuff on the board. They play an extra copy of Whirlwind, a second Slam. We've had that happen where they play 2 slams instead of 2 brawls, and then they end up increasing the amount of spot removal that hits for very little. But the issue with that, of course, is there are, if you're going blind into a series, a lot of matchups, situations where you'll just get bailed out by the ability to brawl. And sometimes even in this matchup, yes, this is Paladin favored, but if you can pull something with Dirty Rat and Brawl at the right time, that can just be a lifesaver in and of itself.
Yep. definitely true. And I'm looking at this 10-5 for Shtan, and there are multiple options here. Like, one was Spike Ridge Steed, other one was just Tarim, put some pressure on board already on 10-5 and smash his opponent's face. Other one was just going wide with more minions and prepare a better Tarim next turn. But then you're kind of weaker to brawl. So a lot of questions we need to ask in that situation. What is the best play? And I like going wide because at some point your opponent will have to play brawl if he plays it. And that means if he has it, if he doesn't have it right now, you might just straight out win with the Tarim on turn 6. But if he has it, well, too bad, right? He still has to use his AoE, so you can rebuild after that.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. The ability to just make a second wave of board if the opponent ends up clearing your first one. And that's kind of how the matchup plays out, as you're trying to get that AoE out of the way. The choice to take the Wicker Flame Burn Bristle over, say, a Dirty Rat here kind of surprises me. I thought maybe pulling a taunt minion that does not trigger the quest was extremely interesting. But what that did, by playing the Getaway Kodo the way that he did, as well during that turn, it set up for the Sunkeeper better, because he knew that he wanted just maximum damage on board, as opposed to getting the value guaranteed from Stonehill Defender, because now he set himself up to a ghoul for the 1/1. I really like the way ShtanUdachi's playing this. He's just looking to end the game quickly, as opposed to dragging this out.
Yeah, definitely the good way of doing that, because the problem with Quest Warriors is that if your opponent puts the pressure out, wow, what a pull. When your opponent puts the pressure up, you can't really lose the ability to armor up when you want to complete the quest, right? Because then you have no way of just healing up apart from the Armor Smith and shield blocks. But at that point, the pressure of your opponent might just be enough to kill you.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, looking at the minion that Dirty Rat pulled, that's one of the ways you die really early. If you're if you're Pavel, that is. You're looking to pull something amazing here, really good setup, trying to pull something to then get to sleep with the fishes, but finding himself stranded against a big minion means that suddenly he's out of options, and the way that ShtanUdachi sequenced the minions made it so he got a Stonehill Defender back for yet another value play going forward. And between the steeds and the Stonehill Defender, he's still in it for quite a few turns, just value-wise. I don't think Pavel's going to be able to outvalue him anytime soon.
Yeah, that's true. He can also make an interesting play. He will lose 4 damage in the process, but he can attack with the Ragnaros and then attack with the Truce of a Champion to the face and guarantee the heal on the Ragnaros.
Yeah, so that way it's not executable, right? And you basically guarantee that you keep your board. I think, though, that taking the chance on the 50-50 is also pretty solid, because otherwise you're kind of wasting 4 damage. And if your opponent ends up using 2 mana on their turn 8, that means they only have 6 mana available, and that means they can't play Curator, they can't play Primordial Drake. They're forced into playing those weird 5-drops that they have in the deck. There is no good 6 mana play that accompanies this usually.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, 4 damage is a difference. So let's see how it will go for Shtan. But he's still ahead, I would say, especially with those 2 Sparkle Seed that Pavel doesn't see it. But they will put a lot of pressure on this board right now. Yeah,
there's a few lines of play here that Shtan can take. There's the obvious Steed, as you said. There's the double lock pool into Aldor can also
double one hunter gives. Yeah, I was just thinking 1 hunter then the Spectral Steel, because that pulls up to 4 attack, actually to 5 attack. So you can sacrifice the defender, who is useless now without the second Hydrologist, without the Gateway Kodo. So I like that. I like that play. Oh, interesting. He actually opts to have the defender instead. All right.
Leaving a little bit more vulnerable to specifically the ghoul, but at the end of the day, it's really not going to change too much. It just puts more pings on the board for him to use, another target for Spiker's Steed. Yeah, because the ghoul would have stayed alive had he done it differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where he would have had to trade the minion into it. Now, this is interesting. He's got the Aldor Peacekeeper, he's got the Kodo, and that represents a push of 8 damage, which seems good enough, because nothing you have really dies to Primordial Drake. Mostly you're worried about Brawl and maybe Sleep with the Fishes plays. But the issue is that there are so many good targets with this.
Yeah. But at some point, you need to play into the brawl, right? Otherwise, you're being put into the situation when you have to use a hero power instead of actual cards. And I think in this situation, this is the best possible move from Stan to put enough pressure to make Pavel, threaten Pavel with lethal, and at the same time, he is being protected from brawl because of the fact that he played 2 steeds. And he has still removal for like a big taunt the turn after, so he can push with more damage. So beautifully played by Stan.
This is one of those cases where this kind of harkens back to the days of Sludge Belcher. Those Spike Steeds kind of feel that way when the warrior just has no way to go through enough of them fast enough. And, I mean, the Sulfuras, while cute, will not help at all in this spot. Pavel still needs to get his health total to where he's going to survive whatever is already on the board and then maybe transition into a defensive taunt line, and then Sulfuras a lot later on. But he's not given any break by ShtanUdachi.
Yep. All right, so let's look at this situation here. You can't really push any damage unless, no, not really. You can push 2 damage through. It's not enough. When you play the Kodo, you destroy one of the defenders.
I mean, technically, you can make a really big Tide Caller. You know, if you just go for Kodo and then hit your 5/6 into the 4/3. The issue is then the extra 1/4 on the board is stopping you from going through.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a weird situation now. The Primordial Drake is not really helping here as well. Because then you actually don't push any damage through if you want to sacrifice the 2/3 Hunter into the 4/3 taunt. Does the Hydrologist make sense here just to see what kind of...
I'm not a huge fan of it. I really like the putting down like big minions on the board at this point because the warrior clearly can't deal with anything you have. And if you look at the way that these little Murlocs are lined up, when they die, they're not really dead. So brawl all you want, Pavel. I mean, I'm getting 2 Stegodons back at the very least. And having the 4/8 is kind of insurance against a bad outcome if things go poorly. I don't know if he's got information as to what Pavel's deck is, right?
Yeah.
Because if there's no brawl in there, that's
Well, he have seen like 15 cards out of the deck so far, I would say. 10-10, right? Or even turn 11. And he did draw 2 cards from Acolyte of Pain and Slam, so that's 3 cards. So that's even more. He's around 12 cards left. Interesting.
So I'm going to assume that if I would have maybe liked not having this 1/1 played, but the way he's looking at this is if he brawls and armors up and doesn't have a 3-drop with taunt, then at least I'm like 2 damage away from the kill with just the 7/4, and with this Stegodon it closes out the game. So doing the brawl math by hero powering, lowering the odds that you keep something good, but
that was the War
to
Eater.
Get the job done.
I mean, he has so many ways of lethaling here.
Yeah, you have to try not to lethal to not see it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, ShtanUdachi will take what is a favored matchup in no big surprise, really. This is kind of what you anticipate from the matchup, and ShtanUdachi took the aggressive lines when he saw them set up a beautiful Sunkeeper to Ream on turn 6, kept the extra 1/1s on the board, and just like that is going to take the match that is due to him. So these two guys bringing control lineups, it seems, or maybe more control-y lineups than what I had anticipated.
Yeah, but at the same time, Pavel might be hugely on a huge disadvantage here. If Stan brings even like a Miracle Rogue is actually pretty decent, can be decent against Warrior with questing adventurers with the Sharazin that can be a recurring threat, right? So you have the pressure all the time, which is an interesting choice. I mean, that depends also how many saps you have. There are some builds that can be really good against the Warrior. But in general, the Mage is also a decent choice. So Pavel might actually have a problem with just keeping the Warrior here alive.
I think the Taunt Warrior is really the big issue he's got. As you said, that Mage deck, it used to be that if you were playing Freeze Mage or Secret Mage, especially Secret Mage if I look at it that way, like this is one of those weird tempo decks that never really connected. But these days, with the tempo you generate through 0-mana 5/5s very early, with the ability to discover perfectly fit cards with Primordial Glyph and finding answers through those, the Secret Mage has more, leverage. Freeze Mage is also okay, given that the opponent doesn't have double Armor Smith, double Ally Armor Smith, and creates, infinite armor gain, which is kind of difficult to set up. And Burn Mage, as we know it, or Discover Mage, Cy Gunther's Mage, is just a good matchup against Warrior. You just outvalue them to no end, like a Grinder Mage. So this Warrior's looking pretty rough. No good matchups against Rogue, and potentially none against Mage either.
I mean, the Mage can kind of be bad when the glyphs will be like terrible, but that's like giving away the chance to chance, actually.
Sure, right? Yeah. That's true.
I love the couple careers, by the way. Some people are dropping them, but I love the card because the thing I'm lacking with the glyph is very powerful, but it's creating always a spell, right? Sometimes there's a turn when you just need pressure, and you put a couple career in turn 3, and you get a minion for turn 4, and that's something that sometimes the deck just lacks because your opponent isn't putting any threats, and you're just sitting there with those burn cards that are just waiting to destroy your opponent's minions, and you can't really progress your pressure. So I really like the inclusion of the courier.
Yeah, it's really making the deck more consistent. Again, it's a deck that's all about value and finding reach where you can. This is actually one of those matchups where if you're ShtanUdachi, you did not want Pavel to bring it out, because this is one of those matchups that Pavel is favored in overall, since there's so much armor generation available in the deck, and they eventually outscale you. And if you keep throwing your fireballs and frostbolts at minions, you just have no reach. And in that regard, the Jade Druid is just is pretty heavily favored, I'd say, in the matchup.
Yes, definitely correct. To be honest, I dislike the Jades, especially when I'm playing. I was playing a lot of mages in general, and just always when I see a Jade Druid, I'm like, oh my god, again. You can't really outvalue them. That's the problem. And if they have a nutty draw, they'll just be ahead on the board every single time. Also, we can see that ShtanUdachi is actually playing with a counterspell in his deck. And I feel like Counterspell has actually the lowest potential value against Jade Druids from all today's decks. Like from the metagame. Because there are so many spells that just have no value at all. Like Innervate, right?
Sure. Yeah, if he doesn't need it because you haven't put any pressure.
Yeah, then Innervate is just a free Counterspell target. All the Jade Idols, and unless you Counterspell a second one, Scales are also 1 mana. There's no real tempo gain in this situation. This is not anymore like a mad scientist which pulls out the secret, and then you see that the counterspell actually gained value and tempo at the same time. Here, Shtan is actually behind because he lost turn 4 to the counterspell, which gained only 1 mana net.
Well, he still has the ability to set up more tempo recovery with Medivh's Valet. I mean, he fights for the board quite nicely here, contesting the 2 minions, forcing hero power away from his opponent, and he develops the ice block as well. Also to note, Ethereal Arcanist was picked up by the Cabal Courier. Not something we'd usually, we expect. But in that case, it's going to be a 5/5, and that's exactly big enough to be annoying to the board state that Pavel has, because it sets up the 3/6 into a ping range, and I think ShtanUdachi may actually be fine, given the amount of value in the hand. I mean, he's got the glyph, he's got the tome that he picked up off the top, which I think that is interesting. I've rarely seen that.
I actually didn't anticipate a Cabal Tome at all in his list, so that's very interesting to see. And the fact that he got the ethereal hero, that it is a 5/5, complicates the turn for Pavel. Fortunately for him, he did get the Wrath. Otherwise he would have to spend the swipe, right? So that's kind of unlucky.
I mean, you kind of anticipate that you have to pitch as much removal as you can on the minions from the mage. Frankly, once you're out of the minion board for mages, you don't have to worry about anything. This is still a board-centric matchup, and Jade is so favored in seizing it that if they can just stay ahead a little bit, they have nothing to worry about for the late game. Especially we saw Pavel shuffle 3 Jade Idols. He's got very high health total. He's got the ability to gain extra armor. He is far from worried about anything coming from ShtanUdachi at this point.
And he also put Fandral on board, which is a huge red flag for ShtanUdachi. It has to be killed right now. Otherwise, and you're in a big trouble. But at the same time, that looks like a perfect turn for him. Look at that. Babbling Book gives, well, a decent card, I would actually say. The Medivh's Valet and the Violent Portal from the previous turn from the Glyph setups a perfect tempo play here. And he also gets a very decent minion from the Violence Portal.
Yeah, Druid's biggest weakness, of course, being that they don't have very good ways to handle big minions with high health. This is one of the best 5-drops you could have hoped for, I think. It doesn't get too much better than this, barring Doom Guards and high extremes like Leroy to kill a 3/6. This is definitely one of the better results for ShtanUdachi, but, I mean, Pavel has idols in the deck, and once he gets digging, not much to stop.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say is that you mentioned that Druids have problems with high HP minions, right? In this case, the Mage has the same problem as well. Like, the only way of answering a high health minion is using multiple cards with damage, or just using Polymorph, and most of them are not using Polymorph at all.
Yeah, you'll see occasionally someone sprinkle a single copy of it, but it's not the most common thing, so yeah, you're definitely right on that front. Polymorph is supposed to help when you're facing off against Tyrians in the Paladin matchup, but I mean, against these, there's very little value to be found.
All right, Pavel is going off with the Auctioneer, and he did get, wow, what a turn.
That Wrath right there at the very end is pretty MVP. Gets the cycle itself and use the remaining attack on that Drake to get some value out of what seemed to be a potentially dry turn, but Pavel's hand is stranded. He's got nothing to follow this up. If ShtanUdachi can just kill this board and establish himself as, whoa! Infinite value!
I love it.
What?
I sorry for interrupting you, but this is cool. Like, I played a lot with Pyros. I was like, well, this is, sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's not cool at all. But in this matchup, it's actually pretty decent because you can catch your opponent off guard with this minion. Unfortunately, the second Primal Drake puts it already to the grave, so that's kind of sad.
But it's not too bad because you have the Frost Nova, right? Like, that's one of the big reasons why I think ShtanUdachi's health total doesn't scare him as much, because there's no burst from the Druid's hand aside from like double Fel Rage Swipe. And at 12 to 16 health, you're still okay. And with Pyro's Frost Nova or Frostbolt, he's able to stall long enough to get himself back onto the board with a slight edge. Because that Pyros, once it becomes a 10-10, unless the Jades have already gone to insane heights of power, is usually just enough. So I really, really like that Pyro. That's a really interesting inclusion.
Look at that bluff. It's like, I have Flame Strike in my hand.
Better believe me. And Pavel's like, doesn't matter. I don't have the luxury to play around it.
Yeah, I need to get to that Jade Idols and, like, just everything Jade. Aya would be a godsend. Ooh, a Nourish. Well, he will go for Feral Rage this turn as well. He needs to kill that Pyro. He has a lot of health. And, like, the bluff with that Flame Strike is just too important to ignore the minion right now trade.
Yeah, you can't afford risking them having Flame Strike and losing any value from that 4/2 Jade. So ShtanUdachi's line of play really made Pavel believe that there was an AoE waiting up ahead. And either way, really, it's all to Pavel's advantage to clean up the board because, as we said, this is a matchup that's very board-centric. And if you can just stick one big Jade, that's enough to kill the Mage. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you're just looking to make sure they get no value as a follow-up.
20 damage in hand. And a Meteor! Woo! That helps.
Seems good. Oh, man. Primordial Glyph is such an insane card. What a ridiculous card.
Who would have thought it's a great idea to have that, right? It's like Unstable Portal, but better.
But can we just highlight for a second the fact that without the Apprentice, the tempo swing was not as big, because this little 3/2 doesn't seem like much, but it really helps set up follow-up plays. And that's insane. That is completely insane. God.
Look at that. With the Frost Nova and the Blizzard, I think Stan might be actually able to set up a lethal in the upcoming turns with the help of the opportunity. Yes, this is the time to set up a lethal and then just ignore the board. Basically, the Frost Novas and the Blizzard is like an additional ice block. Because there's no way Druid will kill you, break the ice, when the opponent are like, ugh, we're frozen. Let's go. No, you can't.
These Jades just can't move. And ShtanUdachi, with that Frost Nova that he got earlier from the Babbling Book, I believe, is isn't potentially a really good spot. Now, Pavel did pick up another removal piece here with the swipe, so he can remove some of the damage output, but he will never expect the second Pyroblast, right? He'll expect one of them and assume that his health total is going to be somewhere around 16, minus whatever's on the board. And because of Fireball, I think that's already scary enough to warrant the swipe. But because he's got double Pyroblast, ShtanUdachi just has the ability to go all in and still close out the game.
I mean, he has a Feral Rage still in his hand. The problem is he already used 2 scales, and it was justifiable because he had to push the Auctioneer. So I'm not blaming him for using that. But at the same time, this matchup is almost unwinnable for the Mage when you just drop the scales on a minion that has more than 7 attack. It's like 7 health, 8 health, or you even get a 10 or something, and suddenly the Mage is out of damage. Like, completely.
All right, this is an interesting spot because, you know, we had the line with the Sorcerer Apprentice, we had a good line of play open, right, where we could have just gone for the freeze play. But now that the mana cost reduction is no longer available, we have to take a different route to dealing that damage. And, you know, he's going to choose to go face with the Firelance Portal, still, again, connecting all the damage you can.
I love it.
I think it's very consistent.
Yeah, I love the plan from ShtanUdachi. He did make the calculation that the only way he can win the game here right now is to just burn his opponent's face. So ignore the minions right now. This is not the play to just trade or whatever. You will never win a late game battle against those Jades. And he is aware there's only 1 Feral Rage left in the deck. That's only 8 HP. There's no other way of getting the armor up unless, you know, hero power.
So at this point, you know, Pavel is feeling so threatened. You know, he's like a 9 health, so he's assuming Pyroblast kills him. He has to Fel Rage now, but ShtanUdachi will simply not care all that much because he can just Pyro once, Pyro twice. That's a 1-2 punch. And over 2 turns, Pavel has no way to defend against this. Is there a weird tech in that deck that can bring him back? I cannot think of one.
Let's think. Any card that will help him out right now.
Raven Idol
scales. Well, who uses Raven Idol anymore, right?
Well, it's rotated, so you can't see it. So that's the thing is, in a different world, he's got something, but in the current environment, we're just looking at absolute air. I think, right? No armor gain.
Yeah, and look at that. Like, he even puts more threats instead of just nourishing. That means he has no more options in his deck left. He knows that. There's no point in nourishing because nothing can help with his life totals. And putting another threat on board just doesn't change anything here anyway. So,
no BM with the Paveling book. That would have been a beautiful way to end the game, but no need to do such a thing. ShtanUdachi is going to take it with that second Pyroblast. Pavel had the right cue, found himself in a window of opportunity to maybe equalize the series and tie it 1-1, but now ShtanUdachi found the right spells when it mattered and is going to be down to 1 deck, the Rogue, which I want to say probably finds a win against that lineup, regardless of what that Rogue archetype is.
Might be. I mean, that's very probable, I would say. The problem with that previous matchup we saw is that Pavel kind of was stuck at some point. He did draw 2 Auctioneers, but instead of that second Auctioneer, I know he would love more just having a Behemoth, Jade Spirit, even a Jade Idol. Just put a huge minion on board, which makes it awkward for the mate to deal with. Instead, he was just stuck with an Auctioneer and no pressure at all. And with, of course, spells.
Yeah, you needed the Jade Idols really early to cycle. If he had found them, I think that game could have been his very easily, right? Like, a very different outcome would have been...
Maybe, now when I think about it, that counterspell on 10-4 was so important. Right?
It forced the shuffle on the Jade Idols, that's right. Yeah,
exactly. It did force the shuffle. So maybe, I kind of sound like, oh, it's such a weird tempo play because you just lost almost an entire turn and your opponent just didn't lose almost anything. But at the same time, it did cost Pavel more than Shtan, I think. In, like, retrospect, you know?
Yeah, I mean, ShtanUdachi was setting up multiple things at once by making the counterspell play. And it looks like Pavel going with the Taunt Warrior is taking what seems to be the... Well, I don't want to say the most favored matchup here because I think the Paladin has very good chances depending on how it's built, but I think him queuing the Warrior tells us that this is probably Control Paladin as a third deck because you would rather queue up something a little bit better against it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, the hand for ShtanUdachi is not really the best. No bounce minions, no shadow steps. Not sure if he plays Vanish at all. But this is not looking really great. The fact that
Yeah,
Dirty Red did pick up the Firefly instead of anything else is kind of pickle. Like Firefly always brings value. He could have just bounced that back with the Pendleton too. Yeah.
instead of getting 4/5/5s and a quest enabler, right? Because that's the big thing about the Dirty Rat is it basically denies the first time you play it, the first minion that you play. And usually what you want to do is you want to go Firefly and play the flame elementals that you get throughout the course of the game as the enablers for that, or keep bouncing Fireflies. And in this case, like that Dirty Rat hitting the right target shut down the easiest and fastest way to complete the quest, and it's forced an early Brewmaster just for the sake of keeping value in hand for ShtanUdachi, and that's not where the rogue wants to be headed. So now he's going to be looking for what? Mimic Pod, and of course the bouncers, but you know, sure,
that's not bad actually.
It thins. We have time. It's still very early in the game.
Ooh. Well, this is a fantastic play if you have a bouncer, but now like playing 2 Novice Engineers might not be the best case. But at the same time, the Firefly is something that he wants to bounce back right now. So it's actually not that terrible. Although I like bouncing back the Novice Engineer the most. The thing is, in this deck, you just have to make sacrifices at some point. You just need to say, well, I need to dig for the most important parts of the combo, otherwise I'm just going to be dead. That's the Vanish. Important inclusion against this this matchup in general, because your opponent can just go wide with big taunt minions because he's setting up that for multiple turns, but then you can just reset everything, and that's fantastic.
This is one of these spots where the StarLadder bounces, takes the Novice back in his hand, but he can't play it until he bounces it again, because now he's already committed to it being the minion that he gets back for the 4th connection on that quest completion. So while you might think, oh, this is tempting, you just replay it now, draw an extra card. If you do that, you might just never complete your quest ever for the rest of the game, given how many resources you've already thrown into the quest. So this is a good turn for ShtanUdachi. He's got the Vanish. He's going to at least complete the quest on turn, 8 or 9. He's got all the time in the world. The quest for Warrior is very far away from being done. But he's still kind of in a rush, because Warrior does pile on a ton of damage over turns. It's very, very swift.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Now we have 2 minions at 3 of account. We have the Novice Engineer and we've got the Fireflies.
Too bad in this matchup you had to sacrifice the Glacier Shard. Sorry. The Glacier Shard right now, because you know that your opponent has so many ways of dealing just 1 point of damage. Because otherwise, I'm sure that he would love to keep it on the board. Because Glacier Shard is such an MVP. Like, against almost every single deck. Stops a crucial attack from a weapon. Stops a huge minion from attacking, giving the opponent just a lethal for 1 turn. Basically, it's like a ice block on a stick, almost like that,
Yeah, and in that deck, it definitely is for sure. There's no argument.
All right, this Cyclop, a 3/7 minion, not bad. And there's the Bilefin. I like the inclusion of the Bilefins in the deck because it gives you much needed taunt against the aggressive strategies. Sometimes you just play it on turn 2 to soak up an attack, a single attack that will be like 3 health. It might be crucial to surviving, to your survival until you put the quest out. And after you put the quest out, well, it's obvious, right? You have a 5/5 minion with taunt. That's great. So,
yeah, getting 2 5/5s for 2 mana seems about good enough to be played. Now, ShtanUdachi has the option, of course, not to mill himself. If he wants to go for trade the 2/2 away into a minion, and then you go for the coin Vanish. And then he gets the minion back onto the board, because I think you need to get that quest complete next turn. Need to get it online as soon as possible.
Especially with that tempo loss that Pavel just got hit with, right?
Exactly.
Too bad that Shtan couldn't attack into the Acolyte of Pain, because he could just make Pavel overdraw, maybe lose a crucial card in the process.
As of right now, Pavel is staring down 2 5/5s. I mean, we see them as 1/2s, but it's just an illusion. These things are going to grow next turn, and accompanied by 3 charges in hand, ShtanUdachi has the ability to start pushing a lot of removal onto the minions that will come out from Pavel. The big issue is that minions like Direhorn Hatchling and Bloodhoof Brave and Cyclopean Horror can oftentimes have just enough health to be a problem, where they're at 6, so then you have to find ways to ping, and since the entire deck that you have is basically consisting of 5 attack minions, your weapon has to be split multiple ways, which makes things sometimes a little bit awkward.
All right,
now,
so
don't
from
make the
hand,
mistake of playing that
yes,
Firefly right now.
Yeah, but
he milled the quest last turn.
did I miss that?
I think he milled it, yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I was just so focused on listening to what you're saying, and I completely missed that.
No, I saw the quest, and I'm like, well, all he has to do here is to not mill himself with that coin vanish, because if he does, then, well, GG. It's one of those things where, yep, things happen.
EU casters. I mean, EU caster. You're from an A. But, wow. Not. I mean, I would like to say you don't see that often, but at the same time.
You do all the time.
Yes, you do actually. You do actually see it all the time. And I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. I feel like the reason why people are still doing that is because they think Rogue will get just banned. And they don't put the practice into it. And
but it's a targetable deck, right, with the aggro lineups. I don't think with the control lineup of Pavel it makes much sense. Pavel is smiling here, still like, I can't believe I won this. I did not set up myself to win this. There was no chance I got this in the right world. But like it slipped my mind. When the quest got milled, I was thinking about it before the turn started. I saw him execute the play, and I'm thinking, all right, so next turn he plays Firefly, gets his quest online. But he actually replayed the Firefly at the end of that turn.
Yeah.
Like, I hadn't followed that. I was under the assumption he would hold on to it and just pitch a minion down like a Stone Dust Boar as a 1/1. Wow! I can't even.
Not enough practice, Stan, with the deck. I mean, that's a mistake that shouldn't ever happen. Like, ever. So, I mean, at a pro level, right?
Sure.
Interesting. Well, let's see. Now he plays against a Paladin. And the odds of winning that are slightly lower than against the Warrior. But at the same time, it's still like... Actually, it's not that bad for the Paladin, especially with that kind of hand that Shtan is having.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, too, is that you don't know... I don't know if Pavel, is running all the early game package for Murlocs, but regardless of whether he is or not, on average, when you see a mid-range Paladin, you're thinking, well, if the curve is too slow, which it often is in that deck, you can just blow them out with those openers as Quest Rogue. The issue is when you start getting to the mid-game turns, you have no removal for stuff like a Gentle Megasword board with Murlocs. You have no way to remove a Spikered Steed minion, barring a vanish that is extremely costly to you. So unless your quest is already completed at that point, everything kind of bogs you down into a defensive position you can't come out of. So this is potentially a very winnable game for Pavel if things go long enough. If things end up fast enough, sorry.
Yep. And look at that. Stan is in a really, really awkward situation. That Glacier Shard actually helps a ton because it will stop the bleeding for some time. But at the same time, you're still in a weird situation. Your opponent just played a secret. You have no idea what kind of secret it is. Now he gets to know the idea. It's a Gateway Kodo. So not really a big thing for Pavel. There's no huge advantage in that, especially with the Inquisitor. But at the same time, still, the Glacier Shard will help just stopping the damage, especially before turn 4 when the Megazord can be played. Imagine just a Windfury right now.
That would be just devastating.
14 damage.
Like, Stan just went double Flame Elemental immediately. But the problem with that line of play, he started and then paused. Truth is, if you've played 2, you can't not play 4 in this spot. Like, there's no way for you to just get that quest online on turn 5 unless you commit to everything. And now, if that is going to be Windfury, that is essentially everything gone on the board.
There's Windfury!
That quest is never going to do anything with the board that ShtanUdachi has. So it's going to come down to ShtanUdachi finding bouncers for the minions he's already got in hand. Otherwise, these Murlocs are just going to do what they want. Patches is going to have to carry extremely effectively.
I'm really surprised that he went all in with with those minions. And if this turn he just makes the quest, that's weird as well. This is the turn when you need to kill the war leader. If you just play the quest, you're just dead.
So how about you freeze the 4-1 and kill the 3-1? It seems like the only line of play that doesn't end with you dead. I mean, you could only kill the war leader, and that's okay too. You don't have to play your freeze, because you could freeze the 5-4 if you wanted. But your health total is dipping dangerously low at this point in the game.
Yeah, but I'm still really surprised by the 10-4 by Shtan.
He committed, paused, and then realized, well, it's too late. I can't go back now. Those two guys are already on the board. I feel like there was a bit of hesitation as soon as he made the play. He played very quickly there.
Yeah, but now Pavel has a window of opportunity. The two hunters will help the Murloc attack for tons of damage again, because it puts him back basically to where he was with the Murloc War Leader on board. Makes it a 4-3. It can kill the minion, play around the quest, and still deal 4 damage to the face, which is great. You just put additional 2 minions on the board. You can still use the hero power, put another minion on the board. You have a lot of pressure next turn. Basically, it's at least 4 damage because the hydrologist will get killed from the dagger. That means your opponent will be at 16, and you will have still 5, 7, 9, 10 damage on board,
which is almost enough to finish off the.
Oh, that's interesting.
The game. I guess he's just going wide. He's saying you don't have prep clearly. So if you're going to be playing Crystal Core with that Glacial Shard on its own, I can definitely combat that. He has equality. That's something to keep in mind. But the damage output suddenly is a little bit too slow to close out the game.
Weird, right? To sacrifice the Windfury Murloc. Like if you have the Windfury Murloc on board, which has 4 attack, your opponent either sacrifices the attack from the dagger or uses the Glacial Shard to keep it at bay. In this case, your opponent is still at 21. You know that your opponent will play at least 1 minion, and that means you will never trade with them. So your opponent will be able to kill the 5-4 next turn or make favorable trades. And interestingly, I would really love to see why Pavel did not opt to use the hunter on the Windfury Murloc, on the hydrologist, right?
I think he's just worried the dagger extracts value, but if your opponent's at 16, then that's probably acceptable, right? Maybe he's playing to outs in the deck, like the second War Leader, the Truth Champion, Tyrion, something along those lines. Either way, his hand contained enough value that he can probably fight for the later stages, but the thing is, if there's a pirate in there that brings out patches, and they're 5/5s, that play seems very risky to me. Like, disregard patches in hand, just imagine it's in the deck, and this is a South Sea deck hand. This is a very different world you live in suddenly. Like, that play is even riskier.
He trades? Wow.
Maybe you need to force trades from your opponent. That's the only way you win this. It seems a little bit too slow. But at the end of the day, if you have taunts in the deck, which you do, he did have the Primordial Drake when he made that decision, and he did pick up the Curator, had the Ragnaros. Ragnaros takes 2 minions. Primordial Drake damages 2. If you have the Consecrations, you can also clean up the board after that for those remaining minions. You have a Sunkeeper to ream in there. You have the ability to find Stonehill Defender for Sunkeeper to stall the Rogue player. Maybe it's just the outs in the deck that end up averaging this out to being a slightly better play in his mind.
But it's so interesting because now your opponent is kind of pushing you to use that equality, right? Because your opponent has 15 damage, 1 card in the hand, so maybe not. Maybe just play the Curator.
Oh yeah, I like that a lot.
10 damage goes through. All right,
Yeah, that's really the key here, is that he wants to get a board clear with the Consec potentially in the deck, and he's playing to his outs. If we looked at it, from that perspective, fighting Spiker Steed means that 2 minions get damaged or 3 minions get damaged down to 2 health, which means Primordial Drake gets value. Everything in that deck can set the 5s down to 3 or to 2, and that means the Drake finds something to kill. It's a little bit slow, though, to be fair.
Pavel went into a different route than what I usually see, or the biggest weakness of the rogue, quest rogue, is the fact that they have no health gain. They have no way of defending themselves apart from the Bilefin which spawns a 1/1 taunt, right? So in this situation, whatever damage you do, it's just permanent. It just puts them closer to death. It's like just few nails to the coffin, and they lose. So in this case, Pavel, with that equality in his hand, I thought he has the chance to put the pressure and still have the reset button available. And now when he made the commitment to go control-y,
he's just going to be falling behind even faster.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, he never gets like enough health back from the taunts than he needs, really. Like, at this point, we're still looking at him finding an out on the back of an equality consec, and that's about the end of it. And at the same time, ShtanUdachi is looking pretty good right now. He can make more 5/5s with that 5/3 dying. You get 2 fireflies that are currently massive. So, not looking bad at all for him. He's got 2 chargers left with the Stone Tusk Boars, I believe, right? So he can use those as well.
And deckhands.
With Vanish, if he wants to close out the game later.
I mean, he has deckhands in the deck still, right? Hello?
Yeah, the deckhands are in the deck. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I was disconnected or something.
No, everything's fine. I'm just looking at this and trying to figure out how Pavel gets out of this. I don't really think there's a way for him to, at this point, catch up, unless he picks up some Taunt Me with Divine Shield. The Sunkeeper Tareem, on paper helps because there's no chargers, so that can definitely stall a bit. But it's going to come down to Spikeridge Steed. He could put Filefin Inquisitor, Spikeridge Steed it, hope for the best. Seems like there's really nothing else to it at this point. Yeah, and he's still setting up an equality with the 1/1 left over for the following turn, so if things go well, he can still finish out the game. At the moment, it looks like Consecration could bail him out. Consec looks, from his perspective, like it could bail him out. But StarLadder will simply reset the health of all these lovely minions all the way back up to full. Will pick himself a new card with a Novice Engineer. And this is telling Pavel to respond and without minion, right? No. Consec. He can just rebounce. Where's Consecration when you need it the most? That
no
is not
Consecration.
Consecration.
It is 4 mana though. So it's like
hype into not hype. On the flip side, I mean, you could always go for the 1/1 into the 1/1 and then give them taunt with Gentle Megasaur. Okay. That gives you 2 Murlocs with taunt. That's enough to buy you 1 turn.
Yep.
That's about as good as it's going to get for Pavel this turn, that's for sure. And then on the following turn, you're still looking for that Consec. I don't think there's any Pyromancers in this deck. It's way too mid-rangey with the Murloc package to include Pyros. We have seen people include a single copy of it, but not to great effect. So I expect the Consec to be the 1 outer or the 2 outer for Pavel.
True. It's not. I mean, still can't get over the fact that that he just went like on a defensive route. When you see your opponent is doing a quest from the rogue, you're like, okay, I'm never gonna get value anymore. Like, they will be just spawning so many 5/5 minions, overwhelm me with just whiteboard charge minions that will attack into my taunts that have not more than 4 attack, right? And they will not trade 1-for-1 or even 1-for-2 or something like that. So basically, he changed his mind. The way he played from the beginning, he was putting out Murlocs that were aggressive and just wanted to kill the rogue as soon as possible. And then the turn when he played 2 Murloc Hunters to buff, instead of buffing the Hydrologist with Wind Fury, he buffed the other Hunter. He forsaken the strategy that he had from the first place. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, and this is what I was alluding to, in the matchup started. I usually see Paladins try to get that early curve. I mean, it's not really something they can control, but when they draw it, sometimes it can just blow out their opponent, and they take that advantage in the rogue matchup specifically and just go all in on it. But after seeing Pavel play, maybe he knows something about the matchup that I don't, because after looking at the odds, I'm looking at Spikeridge Steed sets the health of a bunch of stuff down to 2. Consecration's good. Tareem can bail you out. Stonehill Defender can get you a Tyrion. Stonehill Defender can help put the minions at 4 health, enables your True Silvers. All those things together, when they add up, might mean that playing defensively has some merit. And I'd never really considered it because in his spot, I just go face. I buff, and try to set up the max damage output I can, close out the game with True Silvers, and finish off maybe with an extra bit of push damage, relying on the equality concept to clear. I would like to know if his line of play at the end of the day was correct. Regardless, it was definitely a highlight with that rogue quest being milled by ShtanUdachi. That was just
not noticing.
I mean, I noticed that he would mill himself potentially, but I didn't realize he had actually replayed the last Firefly. That blew my mind. And he didn't even realize it either. Maybe Blizzard needs to add like a flashy thing on the screen that goes, quest failed, whenever you just mill it.
Well, to be fair, to my defense, I was listening to you, and we have no sound in the game, so I didn't hear like the...
Yeah, the explosion. Yeah, sure, okay.
And to be fair, I never expect a pro player to burn the quest, especially after you're saying like, well, he needs to use the coin and not play the other minion that will just make his hand full. So, but yeah, he won anyway. He just kind of went the handicap route, right? He just sacrificed one game, 1-3-1. Who cares, right? The small points don't really matter. It's head to head. But so anyway, Shtan takes the first match of the day. We have still 5 more. So now we should take a break and prepare for the next match. Don't go anywhere. This is StarLadder iLeague StarSeries Season 3.